There are songs that literally everyone on the planet knows. They play at weddings, in commercials, in bars at 3 in the morning, at stadiums during games. Billions of streams. Chart toppers worldwide, staying in radio rotation for years. Now here's a question. Can you name even one more song by that same artist? No, you're not alone. This phenomenon is called a one-hit wonder, and it's far more interesting than it seems at first glance. Behind every one of these songs is its own story. Someone deliberately stopped. Someone just wasn't lucky enough to repeat their success. And for someone else, the industry broke their career forever. And some don't see it as a curse at all. They turned one hit into a lifelong financial safety net. Today we're going through 11 such stories, from Spain to the Bahamas, from punk anarchists to rappers who became home renovation TV stars. We'll talk about legal battles over copyright, unfair contracts, self-irony that saved a career, and tragedies hidden behind cheerful melodies. Get ready, because some of this will definitely surprise you. If you like this format, hit like now. It genuinely helps the channel. And now, let's get into it. If you're over 30, you've definitely danced to this song at least once in your life, even without knowing who performs it. The Spanish duo Los del Río released Macarena back in 1993 as a completely ordinary flamenco pop composition in Spain. At first, it was just a local song for the Spanish market, nothing special. But the real explosion happened thanks to a remix by the American production duo Bayside Boys in 1996. That version, with English-language interjections, became a global hit and held the top spot on the Billboard Hot 100 for a record 14 weeks, still one of the longest runs at #1 in the chart's history. The song became so culturally omnipresent that people danced to it even at the U.S. Democratic National Convention and at Olympic events. Dozens of parody versions appeared. It played at every wedding on the planet, and the Macarena dance is still recognized even by people who've never heard the original Spanish lyrics. So what happened next? Los del Rio are actually two middle-aged Spanish musicians, Antonio Romero Monge and Rafael Ruiz, who had already worked for decades in Spain's flamenco scene by the time the hit happened. They didn't disappear. They simply went back to the regional Spanish performing career they'd had before and after the global boom. For them, Macarena was always just one song in a large catalog, even if it was the most famous one. They kept releasing Spanish-language albums for Spanish-speaking audiences for years after the global boom, just without the same scale of attention, and they still occasionally perform on anniversary tours with the same song. What's especially interesting about this story is that the Macarena phenomenon itself shows how random a song's path to global fame can be. The original Spanish version would likely never have left the local market without the American remix duo, who added the English-language hook and slightly reworked the arrangement for dance clubs. That means even the song the whole world knows was first heard by the Spanish public in a completely different, much more modest version. Here's a much more dramatic story. Vanilla Ice's Ice Ice Baby in 1990 became the first hip-hop single to top the Billboard Hot 100. Robert Matthew Van Winkle, the rapper's real name, instantly became the face of a new generation of mainstream hip-hop culture, selling millions of copies of the single worldwide within months. But the rise was almost as steep as the fall. Critics and other musicians accused him of exaggerating his own biography to fit a tough street kid image. On top of that came a legal scandal over the bass sample from Queen and David Bowie's Under Pressure, which he initially publicly denied, claiming the bass line differed by one note, though the borrowing was obvious to anyone with ears. The matter was eventually settled through an out-of-court agreement with credit given and royalties paid. His next album flopped commercially, and the Vanilla Ice image became the subject of parodies for years to come, including the iconic Ice Ice Baby parody by Weird Al Yankovic. Still, this isn't the end of the story. Van Winkle didn't disappear completely. He reinvented himself through the home renovation reality show The Vanilla Ice Project on the DIY network, which has run for years and has its own stable audience. He also continues performing Ice Ice Baby on nostalgia tours of the 90s, turning what used to be an embarrassment into a source of steady income through self-irony. Today, he regularly jokes about his own image on stage instead of running from it. This story is also interesting because it shows a rare path of comeback. Instead of trying to become a serious rapper again, Van Winkle simply switched industries entirely, moving into real estate and renovation television. He's acknowledged in interviews that accepting his 90s image as part of pop culture history, rather than trying to escape it, is what allowed him to build a new, stable career for decades to come. I get knocked down, but I get up again. Almost everyone recognizes this line, even without knowing the band's name. But here's what makes this story especially interesting. Chumbawamba were actually not newcomers when Tubthumping exploded in 1997. This was a British punk and anarcho collective that had existed since the early 80s, releasing overtly political, often anti-government music for a niche audience for more than 15 years before their unexpected mainstream hit. The sudden success created a strange paradox. A band whose ideology directly criticized commercialism and the pop industry became part of that very same mainstream pop machine it had criticized throughout its entire existence. Many of their longtime fans from the punk scene saw this as a betrayal of principle, while millions of new listeners had no idea about the band's political past. The band's members used their sudden popularity in their own way, appearing at TV award shows and pouring water on politicians in protest of government policy toward the homeless, donating part of their earnings to labor unions and charitable organizations. There was no repeat commercial success, but the band kept releasing music for almost a decade after the hit, staying true to its original political ideals rather than chasing a second hit, right up until its official breakup in 2012, when they posted a farewell message on their own website instead of another album. What's telling about this story is that Chumbawamba is probably the only band on our list for whom a global hit became not a goal, but almost an awkward side effect. They deliberately turned down opportunities that could have turned one hit into a long mainstream career, if those opportunities conflicted with their political beliefs, a fairly rare stance for a band at the peak of fame. This song became so grating that it made several music publications' lists of most annoying songs of all time, while simultaneously winning a Grammy Award for Best Dance Recording. Baha Men, a band from the Bahamas that had existed since the 70s, performing the local junkanoo genre, Who Let the Dogs Out, was actually a cover of a song by another artist, Anselm Douglas, which Baha Men reworked for the American market in 2000. The original author even sued over the lyrics' copyright and eventually received partial recognition as a co-writer. The hit became so massive that it started living a life of its own, separate from the band. It still plays in stadiums around the world during sporting events to this day, often without any mention of who actually performs it. Most people don't even know the band's name, though they know every bark in the chorus. Baha Men didn't break up. They continue touring the Bahamas and the US, often performing precisely because of the endless demand for this one song at sporting venues, turning the curse of the one-hit wonder into a stable source of income for decades through licensing the track to sports leagues. It's telling that for a band from the Bahamas that, before this hit, played mostly for the local Caribbean market, the global breakthrough opened up an entirely different economic reality, even without a second hit. That same track continues to generate income through licensing so consistently that it has effectively replaced the need to release new music for the band's commercial survival. The British trio of the Fairbrass brothers and their bandmate created one of the most self-mocking songs in pop music history, and perhaps that's exactly why it remained the band's defining achievement. I'm Too Sexy topped charts around the world in 1991 to 1992, including reaching #1 in the US. The song was written in a matter of minutes as a joke about the fashion industry and the narcissism of the modeling business, but it became so iconic that it's still used in advertising and film today. Right Said Fred didn't disappear from music entirely. They continue releasing albums and touring Europe to this day, with a stable, if much smaller scale, fanbase. Interestingly, the song got a second life thanks to numerous samples and other artists' hip-hop tracks over the years, including tracks by major names in the rap industry, which continues to bring the band royalties even decades after the original release. This story also shows another model of surviving after one hit, not through nostalgia tours and not through switching industries, but through the song itself becoming such a universal cultural shorthand for irony and self-confidence that new generations of producers and rappers keep reusing it, each time bringing the original writers a new wave of income from sample licensing. German artist Bega released his version of Mambo No. 5 in 1999, a reworking of an old composition by Cuban musician Perez Prado from the 40s, adding a modern beat and his own lyrics listing women's names. The song became one of the biggest hits of the turn of the millennium, topping charts in dozens of countries. But Bega's subsequent releases never came close to that same level of success, despite active attempts to repeat the formula with similar songs. Interestingly, Bega himself never treated this as a tragedy. He's openly said in interviews that he's grateful for the financial stability this one hit gave him, and he continues touring Europe with it at 90s and 2000s nostalgia festivals, remaining in demand specifically as the performer of this one particular song. It's also worth mentioning that the Mambo No. 5 melody had a complicated legal backstory even before Bega. The heirs of the original Cuban composer Perez Prado received a share of royalties for the melody's use, making this story a telling illustration of how one hit can split profits among several generations of authors from different decades and countries at once. American hip-hop duo Tag Team released Whoomp, There It Is, in 1993, and the song instantly became one of the defining club and sports anthems of the 90s, selling in the millions. The problem was that a very similar song, with an almost identical title, came out from another group at nearly the same time, creating market confusion and legal disputes over who actually originated the format. Tag Team couldn't repeat their commercial success with any subsequent release, but, like Baha Men, they found a stable niche. The song is still actively licensed for sports broadcasts and advertising, and the duo continues performing on nostalgia tours, living almost entirely off this one track for more than 30 years. Less well known outside the English-speaking world, but an important and the heaviest story in this video. New Zealand artist Polly Fumana, performing as OMC, released How Bizarre in 1996. The song became New Zealand's most successful musical export of its time, topping charts in Australia and Canada and reaching the top of the charts in the US. But behind the commercial success lay a bitter truth. Due to complicated contract arrangements with his label, Fumana received only a small share of the song's millions in profits. Subsequent releases never repeated that success, and Fumana struggled with health problems, including diabetes, until his death in 2010 at age 40. This story is an important reminder that behind every one-hit wonder there can be a far more complicated financial and personal reality than it seems from the stage. When the whole world is singing along to the chorus without even knowing the name of the person who wrote it. Before she was ever a one-hit pop singer, Toni Basil had already spent nearly 2 decades working in Hollywood as a dancer and choreographer, including choreography work on major film and concert productions. Mickey, released in 1982, reached #1 in the US and became one of the defining cheerleader pop anthems of the era, helped enormously by its highly memorable music video, which is often cited as one of the most influential clips of the early MTV era. But Basil never actually needed a second hit to sustain her career because she'd never really left her original profession. After Mickey, she went right back to choreography, working behind the scenes on tours and films for other major artists for decades, treating her own pop stardom as a brief and enjoyable detour rather than the main event of her career. The Australian rock band Divinyls had actually been active since the late 70s, building a solid following at home well before their one truly global crossover hit. I Touch Myself, released in 1990, became the band's only song to reach the top 10 in the US, driven by its bold, direct lyrics and the commanding stage presence of lead singer Chrissy Amphlett. Divinyls never repeated that level of international success, but they kept recording and touring, remaining a respected name on the Australian rock scene for years afterward. Amphlett continued performing and later spoke openly about her health struggles, including a multiple sclerosis diagnosis, before her death from breast cancer in 2013. For Australian audiences, Divinyls were never really a one-hit band at all. That label only applies to how the rest of the world remembers them. Unlike most names on this list, Dexys Midnight Runners were a British band with a genuinely fluid, ever-changing lineup built around one central figure, singer Kevin Rowland, who kept steering the band through different sounds and aesthetics across the years. Come On Eileen, a fusion of Celtic folk instrumentation with pop songwriting, hit #1 both in the UK and the US in 1982, becoming an era-defining hit almost overnight, complete with its own distinctive dungarees and neckerchief fashion look that fans still recreate at retro parties today. The band never matched that success again and eventually dissolved, though Rowland revived the Dexys name periodically over the following decades for new projects and reunion tours. Interestingly, the song's massive and enduring popularity at parties and karaoke nights worldwide means it still generates steady royalty income today, even though most casual listeners couldn't name a single other Dexys Midnight Runners song. And to close things out, a few more stories in just one sentence each, so you'll definitely recognize at least one of them. Crazy Town and their 2000 hit Butterfly, a new metal meets hip-hop crossover that topped the US charts, after which internal lineup changes and a shift in the rock music landscape kept the band from ever reaching that height again. And the Danish-Norwegian group Aqua with Barbie Girl in 1997, a song so massive it eventually drew a lawsuit from the toy company Mattel over the use of the Barbie name, and remains, in the US market specifically, the only song most listeners can name by the band, even though Aqua had a much longer and more varied hit-making career back home in Scandinavia and across Europe. Each of these stories deserves its own full video, Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a deep dive into any of them. Looking at all these stories, we can spot a few recurring patterns. First, a one-hit wonder isn't a lack of talent. It's often the result of a random cultural resonance of a specific song at a specific moment in time, which is difficult and often simply impossible to deliberately repeat. The perfect combination of melody, moment, and cultural context rarely happens twice in a row for the same artist. Second, many of these performers had long music careers before and after the hit in niche scenes. Los del Río in flamenco, Chumbawamba in the punk movement, Toni Basil in choreography. The world just remembered one moment of their creative work, completely ignoring the decades of work around it. Third, contracts from the 90s and early 2000s often left the lion's share of profits with labels and remix producers rather than the original songwriters themselves. OMC's story is the most telling and tragic example of this. And fourth, some of these performers turned one hit into a lifelong source of steady income through tours, licensing for sports and advertising, and samples in other people's tracks. Baha Men, Tag Team, and Right Said Fred are vivid proof that one hit doesn't necessarily mean the end of financial well-being, even if it means the end of a music career in the traditional sense. One hit can feel like a curse or a reward, depending on which side you're looking at it from. For some, it's steady income for decades through tours and licensing. For others, it's a heavy shadow they never manage to escape. And for others, still, it's simply one bright episode in a long and rich music career that the world just never fully noticed. Hit like and let me know in the comments which one-hit wonder you want a full investigation into next. See you in the next video.